Today, we're going to unpack something we see every single day: gender in media. We're going to deconstruct the subtle and sometimes not so subtle codes that shape the characters on our screens. You'll see why so many of them feel so familiar and what that really means for how we see the world, and maybe even ourselves. You know that feeling, right? You're watching a brand new movie, but the hero feels like a carbon copy of another hero. The tough guy who never shows an ounce of fear, or the woman whose main role is, well, to be looked at? It is not your imagination. That's a pattern. And today, we're going to figure out exactly why it's there. All right, so let's start with the basics. Let's talk about the familiar script of gender stereotypes that's been playing out on our screens for, well, decades. For a very long time, this was basically the playbook for media. It's pretty straightforward, right? Women were often shown as being cooperative, maybe a little passive, and definitely emotional. On the flip side, men were the tough, self-reliant types who kept all their feelings bottled up. It's a simple binary, but wow, its influence on our culture has been huge. But, things are starting to shift, at least on the surface. For years and years, the conversation about objectification was almost totally focused on female bodies. Now, though, we're seeing a really noticeable increase in male bodies being presented the exact same way, as objects of desire, especially in ads. And that's a key shift, so hang on to that thought. So to really understand why these portrayals became the default setting, we need to look at our media through a very specific lens. It's a concept from film theory, and it's called the male gaze. This idea comes from a film theorist named Laura Mulvey, all the way back in 1975. The male gaze isn't just about someone looking at someone else. It's a specific point of view. It suggests that so much of our media is created from a masculine perspective, where the world, and women in it, are framed and defined by male desires. And this breaks down how it actually works. Just picture a classic movie scene. You've got the director's vision, the cameraman's shot, and then we, the audience, are basically put into the male character's shoes. We see what he sees. And what that means is the female character often stops being just a character and becomes an object for him and for us to look at. So what's the big deal? Well, the consequences are actually pretty significant. This constant gaze turns women into objects, reducing them to how they look. It creates these incredibly narrow, often impossible beauty standards. And anyone who doesn't fit that mold because of their age or their size or their ethnicity gets pushed to the sidelines. And maybe the most powerful part is that this way of seeing becomes so normal that women themselves can start to internalize it, judging themselves by those same standards. And this whole thing gets even more complicated when you add another layer: age. As this quote points out, women in media often face a kind of double jeopardy, where they're not just judged by their gender, but also by their age. And you can see how this plays out. The media puts all this pressure on younger women to look and act a certain way. But what about older women? Well, if a woman's value in the media is tied to being attractive to that male gaze, what happens when she gets older? She risks having her identity just shrink, or in a lot of cases, disappear from the screen altogether. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. While all this is going on with how women are represented, the way men are being portrayed is also going through a pretty big change. For the longest time, this was the gold standard of what it meant to be a man on screen: hegemonic masculinity. It's that classic, strong, silent type we all know. Think about those old-school Hollywood heroes. They were tough, they were loners, and they never, ever showed vulnerability. But that old ideal, the one on the left, is finally being challenged. We're starting to see more diverse kinds of masculinity pop up. Characters who are emotional, who work with others, who treat women like actual equals. The very idea of what makes a male character strong is getting a lot bigger. And remember what we said earlier about male bodies being objectified? This is where that comes back in. Some people argue this is the beginning of a female gaze, where the exact same techniques are now being used on men, but this time to appeal to female consumers. Just think about any modern perfume ad. The technique is the same, but the target's been swapped. So with all these new character types and evolving ideas, are the old rules really being broken, or are they just being repackaged? This is where it gets a little murky. I mean, on the one hand, you can definitely see signs of progress. We have character types like the ladette, a woman who takes on traditionally male behaviors. And of course, we have the female superhero, who is out there saving the world in a role that used to be exclusively for men.
But here's the critical question we have to ask. Are these characters really changing the game, or are they presented as exceptions to the rule? By making them seem abnormal or special, the media might actually be reinforcing the idea that the old stereotypes are still the default.
And here's the perfect example of what I mean. A female superhero can be unbelievably powerful, right? Breaking down all sorts of gender barriers with what she does. And yet, so often, she's still wearing a costume that's designed to highlight her body, which puts her right back under that gaze and reinforces the very objectification she seems to be fighting against.
So, after all that, how are we supposed to make sense of everything we watch? Well, the good news is we've just put together a new toolkit to help you see it all a little differently. Think of these as your new lenses. Next time you're watching a show or a movie, start asking these questions. Who's doing the looking and who's being looked at? Is that male character just another tough guy? Or is he challenging that old idea? And pay attention to how a character's age totally shapes their story.
And this really is the most important takeaway. These are not just harmless stories or characters on a screen. They are powerful, repeating patterns. And these patterns don't just reflect our culture, they actually help build it. They shape how we see ourselves, how we see each other, and how we see the world. For a very long time, these codes have just been running in the background of everything we watch. But now, you can see them. So the real question is, what are you going to see differently the next time you turn on your screen?